morning. There are many forces on our lives that control us, for good and evil. There are political forces which govern and control and provide structure in our societies. And different places, different nations and contexts will have different forms of government. Some free and life-giving, and others very controlling and dominating and life-restricting, I suppose you'd say. There are good and evil in all forms of government and politics that control our lives. And for some people, the status quo, the government system and the policies and the way they govern are good and helpful, and others are lost in the systems. There are other forces too. There are corporate and institutional forces that control our lives through wealth and power and decision making and provision of services or lack thereof. And there's also the family. The family structure is really important in our lives. It's that foundational thing that holds us and nurtures us and gives us life. It's a primary source of economic, emotional and psychological, spiritual nurture, security and socialisation. A place to belong, a group of people to belong to and share life with. Families are really important in our lives. And in every family there's good and there's dysfunction, there's conflict, there's good decisions and not so good decisions. For the most part, families are a great place to receive support and care and love and compassion and learn what's good in life and celebrate the good things and share life together. But families are not always good, as we see in this increased reporting of domestic violence. Families can be abusive and dangerous, places where people, vulnerable people, are subject to violence and abuse, psychological, emotional, physical, sexual, spiritual, places that are not safe. And as we're seeing in the news more and more, they become places of extreme violence and murder, where women and children in particular are subject to the extreme violence and murder of their partners, husbands, boyfriends, fathers, whatever. Families are good and there's also evil. And in some situations, in some contexts, people are forced into being separated from their family, turning against their family. Their religious or political or ideological views are so opposed to their family that they can't coexist. And they're either disowned by the family or they pull themselves away. Sometimes the activities of a young person or a person in the family are so outrageous and bad that the family disowns them. Families. And in this week's reading from Mark's story of Jesus, Jesus is confronted by two of the powerful forces of his world: the family structure and the political religious forces of Jerusalem. Jesus has been gaining this reputation. Mark's gospel story is so fast-paced. He's been preaching and healing and casting out demons and releasing people, liberating people back into life, embracing people on the margins, those who are pushed to the edges and outcasts, those who are seen as evil or different or are brought in and proclaimed as God's children and loved. He tramples on the laws or the interpretations of the laws. He turns things upside down. He names those who are outcast as now in and clean, despite the religious leaders seeing it differently. And he gets himself offside with these local religious leaders who are feeling their own power and authority as being usurped. As his fame grows, so does his notoriety with those who are in power. He's challenging the status quo, and whenever anyone challenges the status quo, there's danger. So in this story, Mark does his oft-used sandwich technique where he begins telling a story, and then he interrupts that story with another story which he tells, and then he finishes the first story. And the two stories, which are quite different, actually inform each other and bounce off each other and provide a deeper meaning. In this story this week, it begins with his family. His family comes searching for him, and he's teaching these crowds who are gathered around him. And they infer, or more than infer, that he's losing his mind. What the family want is him to withdraw, to take him away to a safe, quiet place. Maybe a sanatorium where he can be quietly restored and renewed, because something's gone wrong in his mind. The stories they're hearing and the notoriety and the conflict with the religious leaders is causing deep concern and confusion and trouble for them. Because in the extended families that they live in, everyone knows and is sort of interrelated, but a family who has someone who brings shame or dishonour, that family unit will be shamed and ostracised. There'll be all sorts of social, economic and other ramifications. They're protecting themselves as much as him. Come on, Jesus, let's go away. Get rid of these delusions of grandeur. You've had your go, you've had your say. It's time to settle down and get on with life. Live it like everyone else. In the midst of this story, we hear another story of the religious leaders, the heavies from Jerusalem. They've come in, they've been brought in. The local religious leaders have tried, they've opposed him, they've confronted him, they've challenged him, and each time he's worked his way out of it and shown them up. And so they've called in the heavyweights. And this is really how it works in the world. When someone causes trouble, when they upset the system, when they confront or challenge the system, when they confront the status quo, they create trouble. The authorities and those who have power challenge them. First of all, they laugh it off and dismiss this person as whatever. But if that doesn't work, they ramp up their opposition. They start name calling, defining this person as the other, as the evil one, as the one who is opposed to the good that we're doing. And in this case, they say, we represent the way of God. We are the ones who hold the law of God and define it and regulate it and sustain it for the well-being of our community and our society, of our nation, and to be right before God. And yet you come along and you're upsetting the system and you're saying that the things that we say are wrong, and you're doing things that are upsetting us and the stability of our system, and you're helping these people to see the wrong thing. And so they're threatened and they're challenged and they oppose him. And when their local ones don't work, they bring in the heavies from Jerusalem. And they start name-calling in a deep way, demonising Jesus. Look, he casts out demons. Only Satan could cast out Satan's demons. He's working for Satan, for evil, for the devil. And they use that language. He is satanic. And Jesus uses their illogic against them and says, hang on. If what you say is true, then I'm working for Satan, casting out Satan's demons, liberating people from the influences of evil in the world. How does that work? A kingdom divided against itself will surely fall. Surely I'm working to oppose Satan by your own language. He denies their reality. And then he goes on and says to the crowds, if you want to plunder a powerful man, a strong man's house, you first got to bind the strong man. Then you can go in and change everything. It's a veiled threat against the powers and the status quo of his world. The systems that are actually working against God. The systems that are used in the name of God that exclude people, marginalise people, cast people as sinners and unclean and push them to the margins, who define who's in and who's out, who's right, who's wrong, and are not gracious, who don't act in love and grace and peace. And so everything Jesus has done is to bring liberation and hope to people, to champion the way of love and compassion in the world, of justice, of inclusion of all people, to name all people as the children of God. And the authorities don't like it, and they demonise him. And that's what happens in our world. It happens when a person of authority or power is challenged, they'll start name-calling. Donald Trump, when he loses an election or a court case or someone opposes him, he starts name-calling. And that name-calling escalates, and he abuses them and demonises them to try and put them down. That person is evil and bad and against all the good that Americans do. We are Americans and that person is anti-American. And we have that phrase that I just don't like, un-Australian. Someone does something that we don't like or challenges the system, the way things are, the status quo, they're un-Australian. It's an easy name, but there's all sorts of names. Vladimir Putin used this really well against Alexei Navalny. He abused him. Navalny, as he went into his anti-corruption campaign to oppose Putin and his cronies, he gained support within Russia and beyond. And as that support grew, Putin opposed him, demonised him. But then, when the name-calling didn't work, he went to violence. He tried assassinating him. He was saved at the last minute and treated in Germany. But when he came back to Russia, he was arrested. He was arrested on trumped-up charges. And Putin and his cronies kept increasing the sentence, bringing more trumped-up charges. Eventually, he was taken off to some camp up near the Arctic Circle, where he mysteriously died. And that is the way that the powerful of the world work. That's exactly the story of Jesus. These powers that be were threatened and challenged. Their status quo was challenged. They came and they demonised him in this story. And when that didn't work, they ramped up their opposition until they had him crucified. It's serious stuff. And it happens in our world. So many political dissidents, religious dissidents, are locked away, are demonised, are scapegoated, or are murdered. Then the story comes back to the first story, the family, where the family try to get into this house or wherever they are and take him. And the crowd says, your family are out here, your mothers and brothers and sisters. And Jesus says, who are my mother, brothers and sisters? Who is my family? My family are those who do the will of God. He's redefining this basic structure of his society, this fundamental unit that everyone owned and claimed. He now says, well, that's one unit, but if they're opposed to the way of God, that's not my family. My family are those who gather around me, who are doing the will of God. And that's what Jesus was on about. He's not anti-family, but what he's on about is the way of God. And we can't serve two masters. We can't serve the status quo and the powers of the world and society and the way of truth and justice and life in God. And he invites us into his way, which is liberation and hope for the whole world, and to stand up against those who oppose that. It's a costly way, but it's a way of integrity and truth and justice, a way of love.